Liver would correspond to springtime, wood, thunder and lightning and wind, that kind of thing. So now you begin to understand that your physical body, that your body is part of the universe, that we are not just an isolated, lonely individual, that we have a relationship to the external world, and the external world has a relationship to us.
Welcome to the Transformations Podcast. Here, guests and I will share our transformative experiences and will explore how to find excellence in life. So, good morning, Rene Navarro.
Yes, Mark.
So, you have a new book out called A Fire and Water, Alchemy and Transformation. And if I don't mind saying, I think it's a fabulous book. It's kind of a memoir, but not written as a memoir. And it's really insights into all of the things that captured your interest and imagination over the last 60 or so years, from meditation to cooking to martial arts and poetry and internal alchemy and qigong and traveling. So why don't we talk about you didn't write it as a memoir. It was compiled and also freshly written. Let's talk about that a little bit. How about the composition of the project?
Well, the different essays in the book, many of them were written over a period of time, perhaps between 40 to 50 years. So about my own experiences with masters and with different arts. And so in that sense, it's actually a memoir, except that it is not done in retrospect. It's not like, you reach the age of 60, 70, or 80, and then you look back on your life and you begin writing about it as a form of recollection or a retrospective, but this is not really a retrospective, except perhaps for a couple of essays that sum up the different experiences I've had in life. A memoir is, strictly speaking, in the genre, is a recollection, a looking back. You look back on your life and you write about it. So you do not exactly know if your memories are correct. But these essays were written almost contemporaneously. So there are things that I saw and remember, not from a distant past, but almost in the present. So I'm looking at this and I'm describing it, right? It's not like there is nothing there and I'm trying to recall something. So these are, strictly speaking, journalistic work. Something that you write about that you've witnessed at this very moment. So the idea of putting them together in a book came from you, of course, and Manny Maramara, our good Filipino friend, compiled them from different sources. So we got a collection of 32 essays. There are a lot more, that I have written over the years that were contemporaneous with the event. But these are the collection that we have gathered together and put in a book. So it took a long time, and we had to verify certain information you know, because as you live life, your the picture that you've seen before may have changed. You have read something new, you have seen something that is happening in the present, and so you make small revisions in your portrait of what has been. So I am very happy that we have this book, that it is out there, and hopefully it will inspire people to pursue their fullest potential. Not
Yeah.
only living a life with work, you know, this daily grind, going to work 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then coming home 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, you know, eating and sleeping. It's not that humdrum kind of existence. What is it that tickles your fancy? What is it that interests you, that gives you an inspiration to go deeper into life? The unexamined life is not worth living, an ancient Greek philosopher said. So you question yourself, what is it that will give meaning and purpose to my existence? All right. And this is something that most everybody looks for. You go from here to there. After 10 years, what is it that inspired you, that make you feel the deeper purposes of life? All right. Okay, you're working, you're into computer, you're into technology, you're an architect, social worker. What is it in that kind of work that gives meaning to your life? Ultimately, the question is, why are you here? All right, so that at the end of your life, you can say to yourself, all right, I am happy that I did this, I did that, I went into this, I went into that. I am happy that I have been of service to other people. I have raised a family, all right? I have studied what I wanted to study. I have done what I wanted to do, so that you can go to the unknown, right? And say to yourself, I am done. So this book indirectly raises the challenge to people. What is it that you're capable of doing in life? All right.
Now, where
Is
many
it that you're going to pursue?
Mhm. where many people only find one thing to pursue, which is their career, and maybe a hobby. There's about a dozen things in this book. Your life was full of pursuits, very full. Travels to Egypt and Indonesia, of course, the Philippines, your homeland, China and Hong Kong, and all sorts of places to see all sorts of people. Why don't we talk about first growing up in the Philippines and being introduced into a secret world of Shaolin Kung Fu in Chinatown, and how did you get to the into the Huaeng Temple to study martial arts?
My family, my father especially, had a lot of friends, and one of them was a Chinese whose name was Lao. One day, Lao uh, took us to dinner in Ongpin, the Chinatown of the Philippines. And I mentioned to him that I was studying Chinese martial arts, which was then called Kung Fu. And it turned out, as he told me, that he had a cousin who was a master of martial arts. And he was some kind of a director of a Chinese martial arts school called Huaeng. And he said, I'll give you a car, then you see my cousin, Chan Bun Ti. Let me backtrack. I got exposed to Shaolin Temple boxing through the intervention of and teachings of a master whose name was Johnny Chiuten. He was a contemporary in the university, and he used to come to my dorm and teach my roommate. He would arrive there to the room at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they would practice right there in that small space beside our bunk bed. And I was fascinated by this, so I would stay, watch them, and a few months down the road, I met him in the school cafeteria, and we sat at the same table, and he asked me, "Why are you not studying with me?" I said, "Oh," I said, "I did not know that I could study with you." You know, because I had the conception that you had to apply, you have to do this, you have to do that, you know, and you need recommendations to study. And it turns out that this master is asking me to study with him. I don't know. He must have seen something about me that he liked, you know, that he thought that I will probably make a good disciple. Anyway, so we set a date for my first lesson. And he made me stand in the horse, the straddle stance, right, for about 2, 3 hours. I couldn't even imagine how long it was because it was excruciatingly painful. Right? He would push me right on my back, put pressure on my shoulder, sweep my leg. I would fall down, I will get up again, and he will do that all over again, right? And at the end of the day, I couldn't even describe how I felt. Um, and then this happened again the following lesson. You know, it was strange, but after the first lesson, the novelty was gone.
Yes.
You know, it was no longer strange to me or weird or or crazy. So that's the beginning of my involvement in the martial arts. Um, and then shortly thereafter, he left for his hometown to run the family business. He went back to Bantayan Island, and so I was left without a teacher. And one of his visits to Manila, he took me to see Lao Kim, his teacher, who was uh, a former monk in a Fujian temple in China. So he asked this old man who was in his 70s at the time to teach me. And the old man couldn't say no because Johnny was like his son, adopted son. Anyway, so I studied this style, this rare style of Lao Kim, who is also featured in the book along with Johnny Chiuten. Anyway, to go back to Chan Bun Ti, I went to see Chan Bun Ti in Chinatown with the card of my Chinese godfather. Chan Te Clau was my Chinese godfather. He was the sponsor in our wedding. And I gave him the card. I gave Chan Bun Ti the card. He looked at it. He did not even that's it. He looked at it. I put it down on the table, and he looked at me, and he went on to his business of smoking and reading. And so I was wondering what he was going to do. I had told him that his older cousin Chan Lao wanted me to study Tai Chi Chuan, and Chan Bunte didn't say anything, and he just kept quiet. For how long? 30 minutes, an hour. I waited and waited and waited. So I had no alternative but to leave. And this happened a few more times. I would see him in at Hua Eng and say hello. And I was waiting for word when I was going to start studying Tai Chi Chuan. But it turned out that they had to select the people. You had to be sponsored. A lot of these schools in Chinatown in the Philippines were actually subsidized and financed by the rich families, right, to keep them going, because the students actually do not pay anything. Perhaps they pay 5 pesos, which is about 25 cents, or 10 pesos, like that as a membership fee. So the schools had to have a source of income. Hua Eng was famous for importing masters from Taiwan. A few of them taught Tai Chi. Anyway, one day at the town fiesta, I was there, my father was there, and Chan Bunte was invited. So my Chinese godfather, Chan Lao, asked me, he said, have you started studying Tai Chi? I said, no. I said, your cousin wouldn't teach me. And so he called Chan Bunte, hey, come over here. Chan Lao, my Chinese godfather, said to him, Rene is my son. You teach him. So Chan Bunte, who was the younger cousin, couldn't do anything. The hierarchy of family in China is like that. Uh, so he had to find a way to get me into the school. Anyway, to make a long story short, I began studying Tai Chi Chuan in 1968.
And this was Yang style, correct?
This is Yang style, handed down, excuse me, handed down by Han Chi Tang, another famous master from Taiwan.
Yes.
It had almost the same movement as the traditional Yang family Tai Chi Chuan, except that Han Chi Tang, the master, made a few changes. The opening, right, punch down, brush knee, uh, and cloud hands. The cloud hands was entirely different from the traditional way it is done. The form actually had obviously martial applications. So I studied that form. All right. And then while I was studying with Lao Kim, I was also studying Tai Chi Chuan at Hua Eng. And at Hua Eng, I also was able to study Bagua from an old man whose name was also Chan. So when I went practice Tai Chi there, I would also study Bagua. So that is the background of my studies of martial arts in the Philippines back in the 60s until August of 1970 when I immigrated to the United States with my family. Yeah.
So even though you emigrated to the United States in 1970, over the next few decades, you traveled back and forth to the Philippines to uh, continue training with Lao Kim. I'd like to talk about him for a moment. And many people keep attributing his style to Hung Gar or Hung Kyun, rather, and yet it's a Lohan style. What are some of the unique characteristics of his style that you see?
He has several forms that I found very different from the ordinary Shaolin Temple styles. For instance, he had this form called the Red Boy praying to the Goddess of Mercy. Now, definitely, this is a temple style. It is not a family style. You know, uh, the Guan Yin is a goddess in the Buddhist tradition. She has also been adopted by the Taoists, but basically, Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, is an icon in the Buddhist tradition. And I haven't seen this form anywhere in the world, and I haven't even heard of anybody doing it. Perhaps they would have a Guanyin Qigong, you know, an abbreviated kind of form for healing and self-development, but not as a fighting system. So Red Boy is, I could say, a unique, one-of-a-kind form. And then secondly, Lao Kim's system emphasize the dragon tiger movements. Other systems emphasize, for instance, the popular Hongar emphasizes the tiger crane. All right. And correct me if I'm wrong. And Lao Kim emphasized the dragon tiger. As a matter of fact, his most advanced form is called the dragon tiger.
Right.
And I studied that with Johnny Chiuten back in the early or mid 60s. And then I studied it with Lao Kim a couple of years later on at Hwaeg. That's where we trained. And there was a slight difference between the two of them. And then another style, another form that Lao Kim taught me and which Johnny taught me also was called the Qinghua Corn, which we could interpret as a flower form or a plum blossom form. So these three forms were the kind of a triumvirate, the triad of the system. All right. He also taught me weapons, the Guan Dao, all right, the General Guan, and the five-sectional chain. And also a rare form was his hoe form, you know, the farmer's hoe, right? Which I studied with Lao Kim. My contemporary and classmate, Dr. Jose Santiago Laraya, Jopet, Dr. Joe, studied with me also. We were together when we studied the form. So these are uh, the main highlights of the system. He also emphasized Johnny Chiuten, my first teacher, and Lao Kim also emphasized the scissor of the woman's stance, which is a cross-legged. All right, so a lot of the systems actually, Shaolin systems actually rely on the horse stance.
Right.
All right, you will see that a lot of people stay in the horse even when they are fighting. But Lao Kim, he doesn't stay in the horse. The horse to him is just a transition. It's a bridge between one stance to another. His basic stance was actually the scissor. So it's very confusing because you don't know where he's going. You know, he twists here, he twists there, he goes in all sorts of different directions. And another aspect of martial arts that I learned from Lao Kim, the use of the dragon claw. All right. So this kind of hand formation, it's like that. That is his favorite. And very often he would ask me to do a movement. 30 minutes to an hour, I do nothing except this kind of thing. And then I began to learn the refinement of the movement, right? Would go like, it is not just doing a circle, but there is a
hook and a drop.
Yeah, it's my first time to see that kind of movement. And he would ask me to repeat that again and again and again. And it didn't make sense to me in the beginning. Why should I be repeating it? Is it wrong or what? But what he was actually doing was making me realize and discover certain keys, Keys, to the movement. So I learned from that the lesson that in every movement of the form, there is a hidden code embedded in the movement, and it takes repetitions to be able to discover what that code is. It's just like Tai Chi Chuan. All right, why is it the ward of rollback, press, and push movement different from one Tai Chi Chuan style, right, from another? For instance, the movement ward of rollback, for instance, it goes like this, right? And then you turn your hand and then bring the hands down. Ward of rollback. And then another variations of this is that you go here, you turn to the right, and then you bring it down. All right. So still another version would be in here, and then you don't bring your hands down. The rollback will just be in here, right on the level of your face. So these are the three variations of the word of rollback movement. So the same is true with the Shaolin system. In the Tai Chi system, why is it that you're doing it that way? What is the code that is hidden? What is the key that's hidden within the movement? For instance, you go this way. In the system of Young Family that I studied with Grandmaster Ginsun Chu, he emphasized this. So the hand, the left hand would be pointing to the right hand would be pointing to the left. Why is it that he wanted me to do it that way? All right? There must be a reason. There is a key hidden in the posture. So, and then what he wanted me to do was turn the left hand like this. And then when it turns, I have to pull with my chi. I have to pull the right hand with my left hand, but they don't touch. So I'm pulling it here, and then this one turns, and there is a distance of about 10 inches between the two. Now, why is it that the hands are like this? Why is it the hand is not here, it is here? It is because you're connecting the chi of the left hand to the chi of the right, especially the hoku, the tiger mouth, and the jingle points of the left hand. So here, you do not only have a physical connection between the hand, you have an energetic chi bridge between the two. So you can actually feel that the left hand is connected to the right. Or they don't just move independently. There is a connection. And every movement would have a connection to the body. meridians of the body. This is an aspect that is embedded. This is the code that is hidden within the movement. And so we have to understand that you're not just doing anything physical. All right. When this was choreographed as a Qigong movement, the masters, I think, didn't even think of the martial arts application. They were thinking in a shamanic way, from a shamanic perspective. So they were thinking of the energies of the universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
The five elements and the meridians and chi and so on. So these were conceived originally not as a martial art movement. They were conceived of as a shamanic ritual. And then they began to choreograph, put together these different movements, and this became the Tai Chi Chuan form. And in the course of time, they began thinking, oh, this can be used for fighting. This can be used to do this. This can be used to immobilize somebody. But the understanding of the movement was not from a martial arts perspective. It was from a healing ritual. That was the original idea behind it.
Mm.
All right. For instance, I'll just give one example. The opening, this is very common in perhaps all Tai Chi Chuan movements. You raise your hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this, and then you bring it down. Why is it that this is interpreted as an attack, that you hit somebody like this, you hit somebody like that? This movement, according when I first learned Tai Chi Chuan in Chan Bun Ti, he used to sit with me and explain these things. And he said, Rene, this opening movement is the heaven and earth movement. You raise your hand, that's heaven, and this is the earth. And I realized later on, this is actually the idea behind the Book of Changes, the I-Ching.
Mm.
The first hexagram is heaven, the second hexagram is earth, and the third hexagram is a beginning, right? So the beginning would be
Opening of the
humanity.
set.
Yeah. So he said, this is what it is. So I began to look into the I Ching. Oh, I said, all right, you can actually fit the movements of the Tai Chi into the hexagrams of the I Ching. All right. The idea of change, the idea of fire and water and metal and wood and earth comes from there. And then it is actually also the basic idea behind Tai Chi Chuan. So you can actually interpret the different movements from, is that martial? Of course it is, but not just martial. It is the whole matrix behind the movements. All
Right.
right. So if you see these movements only as a martial art or a physical, then that your perspective is limited.
Right. That's why they say these arts are a life practice because it takes decades and decades to get through all the layers of understanding.
Yeah. And the number is 10,000 times.
Yeah.
That, and when you speak of Qigong or Gong or Kung Fu, the word Kong or Gong means actually indirectly refers to the repetitions that you have to do. And the number usually given is 10,000 times. How many times have you done this? It's going to take you a long time to discover the key to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I have to do this so many times, right?
Right.
I mean, if it's just like that, it's just like that. I don't have to do repetition, but it is to discover the code that's hidden, that's embedded
Right.
in
It's the
movement.
DNA, the DNA of the system,
Yeah, yeah.
the double helix,
Yeah,
you know.
so it begins to spiral out of the muck.
That's right. That's right. You know, talking about the embedding of the system and just reflecting back on Lao Kim's style again of something that is unique about it and is a one of the pointers as to why it's not Hunkyun and that is his Lohan style is that there's a 1-for-1 ratio of stance and step with movement. You know, in most versions of Hung and other kung fu styles, they'll get in a horse stance and do a series of movements, change the stance or step and do 2 or 3 or 4 movements, change to another step. But Lao Kim, one movement, one step together. There's no standing in place. It is all
That is
movement in the
exactly
lower and upper.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
and always in a different direction.
direction.
You
Yes.
never do several movements in one direction. Every movement is taken a different direction.
Right.
So a very common pattern on the floor in most systems is actually the cross,
Right.
right? Whether it is Japanese or Okinawan or Chinese, that is the basic pattern. That's very profound too. It's a wonderful pattern, but Lao Kim has a more complicated pattern on the floor. I analyzed several of his forms, and many of them follow a swastika form.
Mm. And
All
we're
right.
talking about that in the Buddhist spiritual sense, not the German
Now, yes. All
sense.
right. So that's the different layers,
Right.
different directions. So if you're going forward with this movement, the next movement will not be forward in that direction again. You're not
Mm.
going north, 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 and then south, south, south. You go north, and then you go east, and you go west, and then you go in a diagonal. So that is what makes it so confusing. Is the most advanced form, the dragon tiger, takes so many directions. Each and every movement takes a different direction. So
Yeah.
if you go that way, you cannot go that way again. You have to go somewhere or turn around. And that is what's so, I wouldn't say unique because I have no authority to say that. I haven't seen many systems, but it is a very unusual pattern of movement.
Now, your Tai Chi was originally from Bun Ti, and then you became a student of Ginsun Chu. But in between, you met some other teachers, correct?
Yes, I studied the small frame style or Wu style with Master Leung Shum, who was a master of the Eagle Claw,
Yeah.
extraordinary teacher. He had great push hands techniques too, which uh, a lot of push hand movements were from a stationary position, but his was you just move around, which was really wonderful. And I studied the form, the Wu style form, and somehow I realized that it was the same as the Yang family style,
Right.
right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I dropped out. I think when I finished the form, I didn't proceed. Partly because of that, and I was right in a way because it was drawn from the Yang family soloist form. But I was wrong also in that you should never do that, leave, when you don't even have a good understanding of a form. You have to stay with your teacher for a very long time so that you'll have
Yeah.
an understanding what this is all about. So I'm sorry for that. And then in 1983, Master Leung Shom, I studied with him, I think, in 1978. And I used to commute from Long Island right to New York City in the evening, and I would go home, you know, late at night. So that was also a disadvantage. And then one day, when I came back from China, I trained in contemporary wushu in Chengdu. I I came home from China and I was walking down in Chinatown. I saw these two books, Awaken Healing Energy and then Cultivating Sexual Energy, Male Sexual Energy, the secrets
Mantak
of
Chia.
Taoist sex and love, right? They inserted love there as if the Taoist sex had anything to do with love. So
That's
I got the books. I read them, and I called Mantak Chia because this was cultivating, awakening healing energy was about the microcosmic orbit, something that I had not heard of before. So I called him up, and then I began studying with him. I used to commute from Pennsylvania, right? On Saturday morning, 5 o'clock, I will drive to New York. I will park there and then take the lesson. And the evening I will go home, and then I'll go back there on Sunday morning and then come back on Sunday night. So I did this, and then I took several week-long seminars with him. I studied a Tai Chi form, a short Tai Chi form with him, which he called the Tai Chi Chi Kung Wan, which is a slow form. And for the first time, here was a teacher who was teaching the anatomical, physical aspect of Tai Chi Chuan. Also, the meridian aspect of it. All right. So he will tell you, you know, okay, when you're doing this, the skeleton should be aligned this way. The feet should be like this. All right. So he was actually pointing to specific parts of your body. It's not just showing the movement. All right. And he was very precise about that. And his books will show that I was seeing these things for the very first time. Chan Bun Ti, when he was teaching me, he also told me about the philosophical aspect of it. And primarily, Chan Bun Ti taught me how to use the scapula. All right? So that you don't have to move. The scapula can move by itself. You don't have to move. So that you can actually do a 3-inch punch using just the scapula. You don't have to move forward or step forward. And this idea also came up with Mantak Chia. All right. And then I learned the microcosmic orbit with Mantak Chia. I learned fusion of the 5 elements. So slowly we were going into the different aspects, okay, of Chi. And Mantak Chia was very specific about it. He was leading us into alchemy, the transformation of the energies, the emotions, all right, the 5 elements. And anyway, I studied the system, the full system that he was teaching at the time, until I got into Nedan, internal alchemy, which is the enlightenment of fire and water, and that is where the title comes from, and it comes from the I-Ching, the Book of Change. And so I became an instructor. So I did a retreat with him to become an instructor, and then he asked me to assist him back in the 80s. In the late 80s, I was his assistant in the Catskill Mountains during the summer retreats. All right, and I used to test the people who wanted to become instructors. A lot of the instructors in the Healing Dao, the senior instructors, went through me. All right. I think I gave them a hard time testing them for the iron shirt postures and Tai Chi and so on. But they are there now spreading the gospel of Taoism.
Mm. How
Uh,
is Neidan practice and Neigong practice different?
Neigong practice is a kind of a general term for these practices, all right? Internal, where you go inwards, not just on the physical level, but inwards into your organs, into the spirits, into the chi. So your perspective, your viewpoint is internalized. Very often when we see somebody doing a form, we see the physical movement. The physical movement you may consider to be the external, but what happens within, all right, so you turn your eyes inward.
Mm-hmm.
So the very first meditation in the system of Mantak Chia that he calls Universal Healing Dao is called Inner Smile. So what it does is very simple technique. You smile, express your love and affection, the virtues of compassion, except that you don't direct it outside. First, you direct it inside. So you begin this meditation by visualizing the different organs, right? The structure of the body, the skeleton. So you're looking at this inward and smiling at them. Sounds absurd, right? But very often in life, people do not even express their affection for the body, for their own bodies. They smoke, they drink, they do this, they abuse their physical bodies. They don't look inward. But here, when you begin, you have to learn how to look inwards and smile into or at your organs. You smile at your heart. You talk to your heart, you communicate, so you begin to establish a relationship with your internal organs. You begin to establish your relationship with the different emotions. Anger in the liver, right? Fear in the kidneys, anxiety in the stomach, spleen area, that kind of elaborate kind of relationship. So you're actually establishing a friendship, a kind of romance with yourself,
Right.
which is a radical idea. And a lot of people do that. That's why we have addictions, we have abuses in the world because we don't appreciate what is inside us. So for the first time in Inner Smile, we're beginning to internalize. All right. So it's no longer physical. The physical has other energetic manifestation. The different organs have their own chi. The different organs have their own spirits. And it's not just speaking of the soul. Each and every part of your body would have a representative icon. So this is a more elaborate thing, and pursued to its limit, you can really be able to transform yourself. And each organ also would have its own element and correspondence to the external world. Liver would correspond to springtime, wood, thunder and lightning and wind, that kind of thing. So now you begin to understand that your physical body, that your body is part of the universe, that we are not just an isolated, lonely individual, that we have a relationship to the external world, and the external world has a relationship to us, because all of these elements correspond to what we see outside.
Yeah. And that's the subtitle of your book is Alchemy and Transformation, you know.
Yes.
And these things can happen in all aspects of life and almost from any endeavor if you take the principles forward. There's a chapter in your book about, it might be Uncle Rudy. Forgive me if I'm forgetting, but he introduced you to classical music. It was very heartfelt. And I know classical music became big in your life. And we like you're always sharing with us, your close friends and students, classical music.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating story because when I was about 11, 12 years old, I studied the violin in my small hometown. And there was a violin teacher who used to come to town, right, on weekends, and he would teach a few of us. He would move from house to house, teaching a few kids, and I was one of them. My father bought me a small violin, and I learned how to use the bow and play some notes. And then he stopped coming to town because he wasn't making any money. He had to come from another town. And so that was the end of my music lesson.
Mm.
All right. And then I was in my 20s, late 20s in Manila. I was already working. And a friend of mine, Miel Sabilino from college, introduced me to a man whose name was Rodolfo C. Vidad. He was a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He had a master's degree there. He was an engineer. But he had the biggest collection of recordings I have ever seen, right? So we sat down. I was introduced to Uncle Rudy. He was called Uncle Rudy by everybody. And he asked me, he said, "What do you know about music?" I said, "I don't know anything about music," right? I studied the violin, but, this teacher stopped coming to town. So that was the end of my music lesson. Anyway, he began playing classical music. He introduced me to the classical music, and then he introduced me to the romantic, right? He introduced me to the Baroque. He introduced me to Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, right? Rachmaninoff, and he would he would play one music. Let's say he would play Rachmaninoff 2 or 3, and then performed by Byron Nelson, for instance, right? And then he would play another recording by another pianist, and then another pianist. So I had developed a kind of sensitivity to the different versions. He would also do that to the different operas. All right. He would play an aria sung by one singer and then another singer and another singer. And this went on for, I don't know how long, 2, 3 years before I came to the United States. And he would actually tape some of this music, right? He
Mm.
taped selections from the Ring of the Nibelung by Wagner for me, and I would take it home. I had a tape recorder, and I would play uh, this music in my apartment, and it was a row of apartments, and the sound would reverberate all over the place. So I got exposed to this, and I developed an appreciation for different types of music.
Now
He
those
even played he even played the songs of the Soviet Army chorus. Yeah, so I got to know Russian songs, and Kalinga and so on and so forth. And then he, one time he played Misaluba, the African Mass in Latin, right? My first time to hear these
Wow.
different versions, from different countries. Anyway, you were asking.
Oh, there's so many parallels there because with martial arts and alchemy, because with Tai Chi, you were just saying here's three ways of doing ward off and roll back, and you're listening to these performances of the same composition done in different ways. It's the spirit of the performer coming through, uh, and the music is being transformed within that performer, and at the same time, the performer is being transformed internally by the music, right?
Yeah,
Music is healing. There are many traditions, especially in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, of shamanic music and chanting for healing purposes. And of course, the Gregorian chants were some of the first music ever made. And classical music, the different brass and woodwind instruments vibrating in your body as you listen. And it reminds me of a connection with the six healing sounds, Qigong.
yeah, there is a reason why uh, certain movements, Tai Chi included, are very often accompanied by music, perhaps the flute. All right. In Japan, you have the shakuhachi. All right. And then you have the koto, which is equivalent to the lute or the jang in China. Yeah, and it's beautiful, beautiful music. The music, the shakuhachi music that's coming out of the temples. They play the bamboo flute, which is really fascinating. I have a recording of a monk who plays this different music on the bamboo flute, the shakuhachi. Miyata is one of the best from Japan. You go, and in Indonesia, for instance, you have the gamelan, right? And they have
Right.
these small orchestras. If you are out there living in a house in the field, in the farms, you can actually hear almost all day a small village orchestra playing the gamelan. I have a big
Mm.
collection of gamelan music also
Ah.
because I I've been to Indonesia a few times,
Mm.
studying with the masters, studying in Bali and in Java. And it's unavoidable. You can actually hear the music coming from the villages, and which is music, the art that is very often neglected. All right, but there is something really, truly meditative about this. The thing about music, like movement itself, is that it's also transformative. All right, you listen to music quietly and you go into a deep silence and it touches you in a very deep way. So it's almost incomprehensible what it's doing to us. But for that moment that you're listening to it, you're transported to another world. All right, it's like you've gone on a retreat, right? Even if you're in a busy intersection of life or the city, you are transported to another world, a different world.
While
Yes.
you were in Indonesia, you had the opportunity to meet several times with John Chang, the Magus of Java.
Yes. Yeah, I was reading about the Magus of Java, Chang, and I was reading about him when I was teaching in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, right? I was there for a month in November at the Millennium. And I was reading this book, The Magus of Java. It's mentioned there that he could burn a piece of paper with his energy, and he could move objects and so on. He could generate electricity from his body. And I said to myself, I'd like to see this man, this master. And 5 years later, I was in Istanbul, right? On invitation of my friend and teacher, David Verdesi. And David was talking on the phone with somebody. He was saying, Sifu, Sifu. And I noticed that, and I said, David, who's that? He says, this is the Magus of Java. Coincidence?
Yeah.
Is it a coincidence, a synchronicity? Was I meant to meet the Magus of Java? This is another question in my life, right? Um, I said, I'd like to see him. He said, Rene, don't worry about it. You'll see him. The next year, 2006, during the Chinese New Year, I received an invitation from David. He said, come to Java, stay with me for a month. So I took a flight. It was a very long flight, Frankfurt, Germany, and then Singapore. From Singapore, we flew to Java. I flew to Java. And I was met at the airport by David and one of his friends. And the next day, we went to see the Magus of Java. This man is for real. All right, we can talk about him, but it's so different when you are in his presence because this man is a real person. You know, it's not something you imagined in some fantasy or something or in a movie. I was introduced to him by David. He is looking like an ordinary man. I mean, it wouldn't be different from somebody you met in the street in Java or Indonesia or even the Philippines. All right. And David asked him, Sifu, David said, can you do a little demonstration for Rene? And he put out his arm like this. He said, touch me. So I touched like this. I got electrocuted. Strange, right? I mean, electricity coming from the arm of a man. And then he said, touch my navel. I touched his navel. Strange request, right? I touched his navel. Electricity again. It's just like you put your finger in a electrical, what's that called?
Outlet.
Outlet. And then David said, can you test how much chi Rene has? And so he put his finger on my navel. And then he said 20%.
Oh boy.
20%, right? That means I have work to do. And he looked at me. He said, what you have experienced is just 5% of my power.
Mm,
That is to say, if he raises the amp of his
right.
electricity, I could die,
Mm,
right? And I told him that I had a problem with my shoulder rotator cuff injury. A doctor, a surgeon told me that I needed surgery. And I told him about it. And he asked me to go to follow him to his clinic. He made me lie down on the table, treatment table. And Anna Vladimirova, a Russian woman, held my arm. She took off her shoes, apparently to ground me, right?
mm,
And I was already anxious. I said, what is this, right? And the man inserted 3 needles on my deltoid. Nothing happened, right? And he began to manipulate the needles, right? So
mm,
turn the needle.
right.
That is when I began to scream because it was so painful. Very powerful electricity running up and down my body.
Wow.
He turned all 3 of them. So I like a crybaby, right? I was screaming and crying, and I wanted him to stop, and then it was done. He did this about 2, 3 times, right? You know, before he did the treatment, I couldn't raise my arm, right? I had
Yeah.
a Tai Chi class at the New England School of Acupuncture. I had to cancel it because I was totally immobilized. I couldn't raise my arm like this.
Mm.
But as you can see, you know, I am fine. And we saw him. I was with David for a month in Java. I will not mention for the specific place because, you know, I did not mention the specific place because the Magus wanted his privacy. He has passed away, I think, about 3, 4 years ago when he was 85 years old. I met his relatives there, and they showed me a eight immortal martial arts, which I hadn't seen before.
Mm.
Um, it was a form that required two people to choreograph, right? So this father and son showed it to me. They invited me to their house. They were wonderful people. David, after 1 month, left for Thailand. So I was alone in the apartment. And Weda, David's friend, and I think a relative, the Magus, invited me to go with him to Java and to Bali, right? So I still had more than a week on my visa there. So we went to Bali. He said, I'd like you to meet a shaman, a priest, who could transform himself into a monkey right
Mm.
before your eyes. Shall we go back? Anyway, so I lived with the family of Weda in Bali for a week, right? And I had some other experiences there.
With Mantak Chia, you spent quite a bit of time with him. You edited some of his books and contributed to some of the writings. And you teach and learned and teach quite a bit of his different Qigong systems, alchemical systems. Um, Maybe provide a bit of an overview there for us.
All right. In the beginning, right, within several years, perhaps the first decade of his teaching, he used to teach just in the Chinese community, all right, in Chinatown. And then later on, he accepted non-Chinese students. His emphasis was really on the healing Dao. That's why he called the system the healing Dao. And it was basic stuff, microcosmic orbit, right? John Zhuang, he taught sexology, probably one of the first in the West to teach it publicly. Tai Chi, Tai Chi Qigong. So those were 4 basic courses that you have to go through before you make a progress. And then after this foundation knowledge was taught, he began opening different courses, all right, which touch on the alchemical, the Nei Dan. Nei means internal or inner, and Dan means the elixir, the pill, the medicine. So this was the internal elixir that you develop. And that's where we went into the fusion of the 5 elements.
Mm.
You have 5 elements. How do you fuse them? They are separate, right? And to be able to transform the elements, you have to fuse them. So there is this first stage. You have emotions in the heart, in the kidneys, in the liver, in the lungs, right? You have emotions in the stomach, spleen, pancreas area. Now, how do you fuse them and transform them into virtue? You have all of these negative emotions. How do you transform them? How do you change yourself? And he called this stage of his teachings the Immortal Dao.
Mm.
All right. Perhaps the word immortal is a mistranslation of the word Xian.
Mm.
All right. Xian, which was spelled Hsien before, which referred to the hermits in the mountain. And they were called fairies or immortals, right?
Right.
And the English is not really a good translation of it. They were mountain spirits, right? Mountain men.
Mm.
Perhaps that's the better, because the character for it shows a man standing, man, and then a mountain. That means they were mountain men.
Right.
But it was translated into English as immortal. So we have a conception that they are going to live physically forever, right? That's possibly, that's a possibility, but then again, it's a wrong translation of the word Shan. So the Immortal Dao. So he had 9 stages for it, right? And the foundation of it would be the first 4 that I mentioned, right? Sexology, Tai Chi, Iron Shirt, and Microcosmic Orbit. That's the foundation, the groundwork for the practice. And then you go into the alchemy, fusion of the 5 elements. There are 3 stages in the fusion of the 5 elements. And then you go into the enlightenment of fire and water, Kan and Li. All right, so that is the first stage, lesser. And here you are dealing with the 3 Dantian, lower, middle, and upper Dantian. So in the lower Dantian, you begin to develop the field, the area of the lower Dantian, which is located somewhere behind or below the navel. This is a subject that has been discussed by a lot of people. All right. And to me, with respect to their views, to me, the Dantian has parameters. What are the parameters of the Dantian? A very good discussion of the Dantian is in a classic book, the Nanjing, the classic of difficult issues. And the issue of the Dantian is discussed in here by different masters. Where is the Ming Men located? The Ming Men in acupuncture is located at that point between the lumbar vertebrae 2 and 3. So that's where you needle to activate the Ming Men. And where is the Ming Men located? Actually, according to the Nanjing, it's the chi between the kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The chi between the kidneys. So it's inside, right? It's
Right.
between the kidneys. So where is it exactly? To me, it's at the intersection of several meridians. If you're going to draw a line between the navel and the Ming Men in the back, the navel in front and the Ming Men in the back, and you draw a line from the daimai, gallbladder 26 right, gallbladder 26 left, you are going to have a cross. And somewhere within the cross is the Ming Men. And you've actually, if you draw these lines, you've actually created the tien or the field. And that is the field. And that is where your cauldron is going to be. That is my humble opinion from my studies, all right? I can understand that other people would have a different opinion about this, but then it's very personal, our pursuit of this mystical aspect of the body is various. Everyone has a different approach to it, and I respect the opinion of other people. But at the same time, to me, from my own experience and from my observation and studies with the different masters, for instance, the Hermits of Huang Shan, right, and the Magus of Java, from my observation of their practices, the intersection of these lines would be where the Dantian is located, and that is where you have to feel. You cannot just visualize a big pot, and filling it up around behind the navel. You've got to be specific because the Dantian is specific. It is described in the classic. It's between the kidneys, and between the kidneys would be the intersection of this. And if you draw a line also, if you're going to follow the meridians of the daimai, the belt root, and you're going to follow the trajectory of the chomai, the thrusting channel, right? You are going to find a location that would be ideal for your practice. So try this one. See if it works for you. If it doesn't, well, you have to try something else. But that is my recommendation to people.
Very
That's
good.
from my experience.
Right, right. So many people, novices, mistake Qihai for Dantian, and Qihai is an acupuncture point below the navel that is on the surface, and Dantian is inside the body. And you're saying Ming Men, which is on the surface as well, it's actual places between the kidneys inside the body. And so if we don't take a look at Dantian and Ming Men as inside the body, we can't create this cauldron in order to collect and build our chi. Did I get that correct?
Thank you. The thing is that these names,
Yeah,
right, acupuncture names, you are using a needle.
yeah,
So they are inherently, by their nature, on the surface,
right.
right? But in internal alchemy and Tai Chi, of course, you're going deeper into the source of energy.
Mm,
So what are you using? You're using movement, you're using breathing, right? You're using the mind. And the mind can go anywhere. That is what makes this work so fascinating, because you're not just using a needle. You are actually using the mind, and you can go deep into your body and do certain practices which are inaccessible to a 2-inch, 3-inch needle.
right.
In their very nature, these acupoints are just on the surface. So the Ming Men is on the surface. Chi is on the surface. This is below the navel, right? You cannot insert the needle
Further.
5, 6 inches to access the the
Right.
moving chi, what is called the moving chi between the kidneys. So you have to use the mind, you have to use your breath, contractions of the abdomen, right, to be able to do that.
Mm,
So you try that aspect of the practice and see if it works for you. I hope so, anyway.
very interesting. Thank you so much. We've had a great hour and a half chat this morning, learning quite a bit about you and about your knowledge and beliefs and experience. And look forward to having you back again for another couple of sessions as we work through the material that you cover in your book, but in a different angle and depth through a conversation.
I uh, I should I should mention that these ideas, I don't like to be dogmatic about them. All right. These are my experiences, and I'm gladly sharing them with people, and I hope you can benefit. These are my experiences. So you follow your own path and see where it leads you. All right, and good luck.
Wonderful.
All right.